My name is Holden Rourke. I'm 38 years old, a staff sergeant in the United States Air Force. For nearly 2 decades, I've served my country with honor, stationed at Fort Liberty in Fayetteville, North Carolina. I've completed 3 international deployments, and the most recent one to the Persian Gulf would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty. Before I left for that deployment in March 2025, I made sure everything was in order. The mortgage on our house was current. My Dodge Challenger, a 2015 model I'd spent countless Sunday afternoons restoring piece by piece, sat safely in the garage. Our joint bank accounts were organized. Bills were set up on autopay. I thought I'd covered all my bases, and I trusted my wife, Lydia Moresby, completely. We'd been married for 6 years. She was supposed to be my foundation, my home base while I was overseas serving our country. The deployment itself was routine in military terms. Long days, limited internet access, the constant hum of operations in a forward base. But something felt off almost immediately. Lydia's messages became sparse. Then they stopped altogether. At first, I told myself it was just the time difference, or maybe she was busy with work. But that nagging feeling in my gut, the one you develop after years of military service, wouldn't go away. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. It was a buddy of mine back at Fort Liberty who finally confirmed what I'd been dreading. His message came through on one of the rare occasions I had decent internet access in late May 2025. The words hit me harder than any enemy fire ever could. Lydia had sold my Challenger. That car wasn't just a vehicle. It was my escape, my therapy, my pride and joy. Every bolt I'd tightened, every part I'd replaced, every hour I'd invested represented something real and tangible in my life. But that wasn't even the worst part. She'd moved another man into our house, the house I'd purchased in 2022 with my re-enlistment bonus, the home we'd chosen together, the place where we'd planned to build our future. Some stranger was now sleeping in my bed, eating at my table, living the life that was supposed to be mine. Lydia didn't send explanations, no lengthy emails trying to justify her actions, no apologetic text messages, nothing, just silence. Complete, calculated silence. She'd made a bet that I was too far away to do anything about it, that my service to this country made me vulnerable, made me powerless. She assumed the distance between us, the thousands of miles separating North Carolina from the Persian Gulf, would protect her from any consequences. I won't lie. The betrayal cut deep. There's something particularly cruel about being betrayed while you're deployed, while you're serving your country, putting your life on the line. You're supposed to worry about external threats, not whether your wife is dismantling your life back home. But I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Air Force. I've been trained to think strategically, to stay calm under pressure, to assess situations before reacting. So that's exactly what I did. Instead of firing off angry messages or making desperate phone calls, I pulled up the documentation I'd carefully filed before deployment, the deed to the house, the title paperwork, the financial records. And then I remembered something Lydia had clearly forgotten or never fully understood. Before this deployment in February 2025, I'd met with the Legal Assistance Office on base. It was standard procedure, really, just making sure everything was protected while I was overseas. The attorney had recommended something specific, a military protection trust. This wasn't just some generic estate planning document. A military protection trust is designed specifically to protect service members on active duty. It includes special clauses, federal protections that civilian trusts don't have. One of the most important provisions prohibited the sale, transfer, or unauthorized use of the property without my express written consent. Lydia had signed the paperwork along with me. She'd barely glanced at it, trusting that it was just routine legal stuff that would never matter. But now it mattered more than anything. The trust was registered, legally binding, protected under federal law. And Lydia had just violated every single clause by allowing someone to occupy the property without my knowledge or consent. Looking back now, I can see the signs were there months before I deployed. Starting in late 2024, Lydia had started pulling away gradually, so slowly that I'd convinced myself it was nothing. She'd become less interested in talking about our future. Small things would set her off, things that never bothered her before. She spent more time on social media, more time with friends outside the military community. I remember trying to have a conversation about what we'd do after my next tour ended. Maybe finally taking that trip to the Grand Canyon we'd always talked about. She just shrugged and changed the subject, but I'd wanted to believe everything was fine. That's what you do when you love someone, right? You give them the benefit of the doubt. You assume stress at work or just a rough patch. You don't want to believe that the person you married, the person you trusted with everything, is already planning their exit strategy while you're preparing to serve your country overseas. The legal assistance office at Fort Liberty had been thorough, I'll give them that. The attorney, a sharp major with years of JAG experience, had walked me through every document in February 2025. Staff Sergeant Rourke, he'd said, I always recommend a military protection trust for deployed service members, especially those with significant assets. It's not that I think your spouse would do anything wrong, but it protects both of you from potential complications. I'd nodded along, half listening at the time, focused more on my pre-deployment checklist than on legal technicalities. The major had continued, explaining how the trust worked. Under the Service Members Civil Relief Act and additional military protections, this trust prevents any sale, mortgage, lease, or unauthorized occupancy of the property while you're on active duty orders. Both parties sign, but it requires your express written consent, notarized and verified, for any changes or uses beyond what's explicitly outlined. Lydia had sat beside me during that appointment, scrolling through her phone. When the major asked if she had any questions, she'd just smiled and said, "No, it all sounds good." She signed where indicated. We both did. The paperwork was filed with the county clerk's office, properly registered and legally binding. At the time, it seemed like just another box to check before deployment. Now, it was the key to everything. From the Persian Gulf, with limited communication options, I started doing what I could in June 2025. I reached out to a few trusted friends back at Fort Liberty, not to cause drama or spread gossip, just to verify what I'd been told. The confirmations came back one by one. Yes, Lydia had sold the Challenger in early May. She'd gotten about $14,000 for it, far less than the $18,000 I'd invested in parts and restoration over 3 years, but enough to fund whatever new life she was building. Yes, there was definitely another man living in the house. Neighbors had seen him coming and going regularly for at least 2 months, starting sometime in April. 2 months. While I was sleeping in a barracks halfway around the world, worrying about operations and mission readiness, she'd already replaced me. She hadn't just moved on emotionally. She'd physically erased my presence from our home, from our life together. I requested access to our joint bank account statements through the military banking system. What I found there confirmed everything. Lydia had been making purchases I didn't recognize. Furniture had been sold through Facebook Marketplace, replaced with new items. She'd changed utilities into her name only. She'd even redirected some of the mail. Every action was deliberate, calculated. She was building a new life, and she'd assumed I'd be too far away, too occupied, too powerless to stop her. But here's what Lydia didn't understand about military service. We're trained to plan, to think ahead, to anticipate scenarios. And more importantly, we have resources. The military takes care of its own, especially when it comes to legal protections for deployed service members. Every move she'd made, every decision she'd taken without my knowledge or consent, was a violation of that military protection trust. And that trust wasn't just a piece of paper. It carried the weight of federal law. I documented everything. Screenshots of the bank transactions. Copies of the vehicle title transfer she'd forged my signature on, which was its own separate crime. Statements from neighbors about the unauthorized occupant. I built a case the way I'd been trained to approach any mission, methodically, thoroughly, with attention to every detail. The beauty of it was that Lydia had done all the work for me. Every transaction left a digital trail. Every decision she'd made without my consent was time-stamped and recorded. Men rarely talk about this, but anyone who has gone through betrayal or disappointment knows how deeply it can wound your confidence, dignity, and sense of self-respect. And even men who've never lived something like that feel that quiet fear of being caught off guard one day. If you feel you need to rebuild some of that strength, or want to protect yourself so you're never put in that position, I left a clear and practical resource in the pinned comment, made specifically to help you deal with situations like this. And if you're watching on TV, just point your phone's camera at the QR code on the screen. The deployment felt longer than usual, but I stayed focused. I had a job to do, and I wasn't going to let personal problems interfere with my duties or put my team at risk. But in the quiet moments, during the rare downtime we got, I reviewed my documentation. I communicated with the legal assistance office back home. I made sure every piece was in place. When I finally got my orders to return stateside in late September 2025, I didn't tell Lydia. She didn't know my exact return date anyway, since she'd stopped responding to any messages months ago. I landed at Pope Army Airfield adjacent to Fort Liberty on a Tuesday morning in early October. Instead of going home, I went straight to the legal assistance office. The same major who'd helped me set up the trust was waiting. I'd emailed ahead, and he'd already reviewed everything I'd sent him. "Staff Sergeant Rourke," he said, shaking my hand. "This is one of the clearest violations of a military protection trust I've seen. She didn't just bend the rules. She shattered them." He laid out the documents on his desk. Unauthorized occupancy of a protected property, sale of jointly owned assets without consent while you were deployed, possible forgery on the vehicle title transfer. We have more than enough to proceed. "What's the timeline?" I asked. "I can have the initial legal notice drafted and delivered within 48 hours, he replied. "It'll go to the property and to her personally. The unauthorized occupant will be legally required to vacate immediately. She'll be notified that she's in violation of federal protections for deployed service members, which carries significant civil penalties." I nodded. "Do it." The major smiled slightly. "With pleasure. Service members sacrifice enough. They shouldn't have to worry about this kind of betrayal from home." That night I checked into a hotel near base. I could have stayed in temporary billeting, but I wanted a quiet place to decompress, to process everything that had happened over the past months. I ordered takeout from a local barbecue place, something I'd been craving throughout the deployment, and I waited. The legal notice was delivered on Thursday morning at 9:47 a.m. I know the exact time because the process server documented everything, as required by law. The notice went to two parties: the unauthorized occupant living in my house, and Lydia herself at her workplace. She was a dental hygienist at a practice downtown, earning about $48,000 a year. And according to the process server, she'd gone pale when she read the first page. The document was clear and unambiguous. It stated that the property at the address in question was protected under a military protection trust established prior to my deployment. That any occupancy, use, or modification of said property without the express written consent of Staff Sergeant Holden Rourke constituted a violation of federal law protecting deployed service members. That the current unauthorized occupant had 72 hours to vacate the premises. And that Lydia Moresby was hereby notified of civil violations and potential penalties for unauthorized use of protected assets. I didn't hear anything for exactly 36 hours. Radio silence, just like she'd given me during my deployment. But I knew the clock was ticking. The boyfriend, whoever he was, would be getting nervous. Lydia would be scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. And most importantly, they'd both be realizing that the distance that had once protected them from my reaction was now meaningless. My phone rang on Friday afternoon. I was at the gym on base, working through some of the tension that had built up over months of deployment and betrayal. I didn't recognize the number, but the area code was local to Fayetteville. I answered. "Is this Staff Sergeant Holden Rourke?" The voice was male, formal, with an edge of barely controlled anxiety. "Speaking," I said. "This is Dennis Keller. I'm an attorney representing Lydia Moresby. I'd like to discuss the legal notice my client received regarding the property on Bragg Boulevard." I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I said, "You should be talking to my attorney, Major Richard Sullivan at the Fort Liberty Legal Assistance Office." "Mr. Rourke, I understand you're upset, but perhaps we could resolve this amicably without involving—" "It's Staff Sergeant Rourke," I corrected him, "and there's nothing to resolve amicably. Your client violated a legally binding trust while I was deployed overseas. She sold my personal property without authorization and allowed an unauthorized individual to occupy a protected residence. Those are facts, Mr. Keller, not negotiations." "I understand your position," he said, and I could hear him flipping through papers, probably the same legal notice I'd already memorized. "But surely we can come to some arrangement that doesn't involve further legal action. My client is willing to discuss compensation for the vehicle, and the occupant is prepared to leave voluntarily." "Voluntarily?" I almost laughed. "Mr. Keller, he has 60 hours left to vacate before the sheriff's office gets involved. That's not voluntary. That's compliance with a legal order. And as for compensation, your client sold property she had no legal right to sell. That's a separate issue that my attorney will be addressing. Mr. Rourke, Staff Sergeant, please, let's be reasonable about this." "I am being reasonable," I said. "Reasonable is using the legal system instead of handling this another way. Reasonable is giving everyone involved a chance to comply with the law. Your client made her choices while I was serving my country. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Contact Major Sullivan if you have legal arguments to make." I hung up. My hands were steady. My heart rate was normal. This wasn't anger. This was justice, cold and methodical. The next call came on Saturday morning. This time it was Lydia herself. I saw her name on the caller ID and almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what she'd say after months of silence. "Holden," her voice was shaky. "Holden, please, we need to talk about this." "Now you want to talk," I said. "Interesting timing. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but this legal thing is crazy. We can work this out between us like adults." "Like adults," I repeated. "The way you worked things out by selling my car and moving another man into our house while I was deployed? It's not what you think. Things just happened and I didn't know how to tell you. You didn't tell me anything, Lydia. You just disappeared. Stopped responding to messages. Stopped pretending to care. And you made a calculation that I'd be too far away to do anything about it. That's not fair." Her voice shifted, taking on an edge. "You were gone all the time. The military always came first. What was I supposed to do? Just wait around forever?" "You were supposed to be honest," I said. "You were supposed to be my wife. And yes, you were supposed to wait because that's what you promised when you married someone in the military. But you know what? I'm glad you didn't. Because now I see exactly who you are. Holden, please. Marcus already moved out. The house is empty. Can't we just—" "Marcus," I said. "So that's his name. The guy who was living in my house, sleeping in my bed. Good to know." "You're being cruel," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice now. Real or performed, I didn't care. "I'm being accurate," I replied. "And no, Lydia, we can't just work this out. You violated a legal trust. You committed what might be fraud in the vehicle sale. You disrespected a deployed service member. Those aren't things we can just smooth over with a conversation." "What do you want?" she asked. "Just tell me what you want, and we can end this." "I want what's legally mine," I said. "I want the house cleared of anyone who shouldn't be there. I want accountability for what you did. And I want you to understand that actions have consequences, even when you think no one's watching. My lawyer said there could be penalties, that I could face fines or worse." "Your lawyer's correct," I said. "You should listen to him." "Holden, please." I ended the call. There was nothing more to say. Lydia had made her choices, and now she was facing the reality of those choices. I felt no satisfaction, no joy in her distress. But I felt no guilt either. This was simply cause and effect. By Monday morning, Major Sullivan called with an update. The occupant vacated the property Saturday evening, he said. We had someone verify it Sunday. The house is secure. Additionally, Mrs. Rourke's attorney has indicated she won't contest the trust violations. They're asking about potential settlement terms to avoid further civil action. What are you recommending? I asked. That depends on what you want to achieve here, Staff Sergeant. We have grounds to pursue significant civil penalties. The vehicle sale alone could be prosecuted as fraud since your signature was forged. The trust violations carry mandatory fines under federal law. We could make this very expensive and very public for her. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to push forward, to make sure she paid for every single thing she'd done. But another part, the part that had spent months deployed thinking about this, knew that the point had already been made. What are the mandatory penalties? I asked. For the trust violations, minimum $5,000 in fines, possible restitution for any property damage or unauthorized use, and a permanent notation on county records that could affect her ability to purchase property in the future. For the vehicle fraud, that would be a separate criminal matter if you chose to pursue it. File for the mandatory penalties, I said, but I'll handle the vehicle situation separately. I want it documented, but I don't need to destroy her completely. Understood, Major Sullivan said. I'll draft the settlement terms. And Staff Sergeant? You handled this exactly right. A lot of people in your situation would have come back and done something they'd regret. You used the system, stayed professional, and got justice. That takes discipline. I learned from the best, sir, I said. The settlement was finalized by late October 2025. Lydia paid the mandatory $5,000 fine for trust violations. She signed over any claim to the house, which had always been primarily mine anyway, given that my re-enlistment bonus of $32,000 had covered the down payment in 2022. The county clerk's office placed a permanent notation on her record regarding the violation of military protections, something that would follow her any time she tried to purchase property or enter into certain legal agreements in North Carolina. The vehicle situation took a bit longer to resolve. I had documentation proving my signature on the title transfer was forged. The buyer, a guy in his mid-20s who'd purchased the Challenger in good faith through Facebook Marketplace for $14,000, was understandably upset when I contacted him in early November. But I wasn't interested in taking the car back or penalizing him for Lydia's actions. Instead, I worked out an agreement where Lydia paid him the full $14,000 she'd received, plus an additional $3,000 for his trouble and any modifications he'd made. He kept the car legally, and I got $17,000 in financial compensation. Not what I wanted emotionally, but practically speaking, it was the right move. I returned to the house on Bragg Boulevard in mid-November 2025. The key still worked, which was something. Inside, the place looked different. Lydia had rearranged furniture, replaced some pieces, tried to make it hers, or theirs, whatever life she'd imagined with Marcus. I spent the first day just walking through, taking inventory, deciding what stayed and what went. Some of her things were still there. Clothes in the closet, toiletries in the bathroom, a few photographs on the dresser. I boxed everything up methodically, labeled each box with her name, and had them delivered to her new apartment across town. I didn't throw anything away or destroy anything. I wasn't interested in petty revenge. I just wanted her presence removed from my space. The house itself needed work. Not major repairs, but it needed to feel like mine again. I repainted the living room, replacing the pale gray she'd chosen with a warmer tan. I replaced the couch she'd bought with one that actually fit my 6'2" frame. I hung my military commendations and photos from deployments on the walls. Slowly, room by room, I reclaimed the space. Word spread quickly through the military community at Fort Liberty. Not because I talked about it, but because these things always get around. A few guys from my unit stopped by with beer and pizza one weekend, helping me move furniture and generally making sure I was doing okay. They didn't ask too many questions. They didn't need to. They understood what it meant to be betrayed while deployed. One of them, a younger airman named Rodriguez, asked me as we were hauling the old couch to the curb, "Sarge, how'd you stay so calm about all this? I mean, if it were me, I think I'd have lost it." I thought about that question while we muscled the couch into position for bulk trash pickup. "You know what they teach us in tactical training?" I finally said. "That emotional reactions get people killed. That you assess, you plan, you execute." This wasn't any different. Getting angry wouldn't have gotten my house back. Screaming at her wouldn't have undone what she did. But using the system, following the law, being strategic, that got results. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "That's cold, man. But I respect it." "It's not cold," I said. "It's just choosing the right tool for the job." What I didn't tell Rodriguez or anyone else was that there were nights when it wasn't easy. When I'd lie in bed in that house and think about the 6 years I'd spent with Lydia. The good times we'd had before things fell apart. The future we'd planned that would never happen. Betrayal doesn't stop hurting just because you handle it well. It just means you don't let the hurt control you. By mid-November 2025, I'd made a decision about the house. I could live there, sure, but it would always carry the weight of what had happened. So I decided to turn it into an asset instead. I found a young married couple, both serving at Fort Liberty, who needed a place to rent. Good people, solid references, the kind of family that reminded me why I served in the first place. I gave them a lease rate of $1,500 a month, which was about $200 below market value for a 3-bedroom house in that neighborhood, because I remembered what it was like trying to make ends meet on junior enlisted pay. The rental income covered the mortgage with some left over. By late November, I'd already moved into a smaller 2-bedroom apartment closer to base, something that was just mine with no history attached to it. The rent was $950 a month, utilities included. Starting fresh felt right. I also started volunteering with the legal assistance office. Major Sullivan had mentioned they could always use people to talk to young service members about protecting themselves before deployments. I wasn't a lawyer, couldn't give legal advice, but I could share my story. I could tell them about military protection trusts, about documenting assets, about having conversations with spouses before leaving. Not because everyone was going to get betrayed, but because being prepared was just smart practice. It was something I planned to start doing regularly in the coming months. As for Lydia, I heard through mutual acquaintances that things hadn't gone well for her. Marcus, the boyfriend, had disappeared within days of the legal notice. Apparently, he wasn't interested in sticking around once there were consequences involved. She'd moved to a smaller apartment, paying about $1,100 a month for a 1-bedroom place, and had trouble explaining the trust violation notation when she tried to co-sign on a car loan for a friend. The dental practice where she worked hadn't fired her, but word had gotten around in the military community, and Fort Liberty was a big part of their client base. Some patients requested different hygienists. I took no pleasure in any of that. It wasn't about punishing her or watching her suffer. It was simply the natural consequence of her choices. She'd gambled that I'd be too far away, too distracted, too powerless to respond. She'd lost that gamble. Everything that followed was just cause and effect. One evening in late November 2025, I was sitting on the small patio of my new apartment. It was cold, typical North Carolina winter weather, but I had a jacket and a cup of coffee. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone buzzed with a message from Rodriguez asking if I wanted to grab dinner at that barbecue place near base. I realized something in that moment. I was okay. Not happy in some triumphant, vindictive way. Just okay. Stable. Moving forward. The betrayal had happened. I'd dealt with it. And now I was building something new. I'd learned that not every fight requires you to raise your voice or throw a punch. Some battles are won with paperwork and patience. Some victories look like a signed settlement and an empty house you can finally call your own again. Lydia had bet that distance would protect her from accountability. But she'd forgotten that even from halfway around the world, a prepared man is never truly powerless. The military taught me a lot of things: how to serve, how to lead, how to stay calm under pressure. But this experience taught me something just as valuable, that dignity and justice aren't opposites. You can have both. You can stand up for yourself without losing control. You can demand accountability without becoming cruel. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well, moving forward, and knowing that you handled a bad situation with honor. If you enjoyed this story, like this video, and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.